another round of applause. I just think it's so awesome that you can tell that they really practice, right? They just look amazing, and they're just so cute, especially the ones in the front that just looks like someone that just came. But anyway, because today is Grandparents' Day, I wanted to read a verse to you, and it's found in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. And I just want to talk today a little bit about Timothy, and Paul is talking to his son in the faith called Timothy. And in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "That precious memory triggers another, your honest faith," and what a rich faith it is. And this is the part I want to concentrate on. What a rich faith it is. It says, your faith was handed down from your grandmother Lois to your mother Eunice, and now to you. Let me read that one more time. That precious memory that triggers another, your honest faith, and what a rich faith it is. Timothy's faith was rich. Why? Because it says it was handed down from your grandmother Lois to your mother Eunice, and now to you. And this is one of the few times in the Bible that God, or Paul, talks about how important grandparents are. He says that Timothy's faith was handed down from his grandma to his mom, then to him. And I like the way the Message translation puts it, because it says that was handed down. It was handed down, and there was a legacy that his grandma handed down to his mother Eunice, and then to Timothy. And today I just want to talk about 3 short things of why it's so important, why grandparents are so important in our lives. How did this grandma pass down a legacy to her grandchildren? And I just want to cover 3 things really quickly, and then share my own testimony, my own story of how my life was impacted by my grandparents. There's 3 things that I see that the 3 ways that we as grandparents can pass down a legacy to our grandchildren. Number 1 is something called time. Everyone say time. Thank you, preschoolers. And elementary. Time. You know, time is something that's really, really, really important to us as people. Time is something that we have, and a lot of times if we're not careful, we can waste the time that we have. And one of the beautiful things about being a grandparent, my parents are now grandparents, you know, they have a little bit more time than they used to. I don't know if that's true for you, but at least for my parents, my dad's retired and my mom's working a part-time job, but they have a little bit more time. So they can afford to spend more time with their grandkids. And how many of you know grandparents love to spoil their grandkids? I remember when my daughter, she was only like a year old, and we're about to celebrate her first birthday ever. And I was so excited because we were trying to be good parents. We only give her like good food, no junk food, no desserts, no nothing. And I was thinking, oh man, we're going to be able to celebrate, and my daughter is going to have cake for the very first time. So here we are at my parents' house, and we have the little cake, and it has 1 candle on it, and she blows up the candle, and we're celebrating, and I turn to my wife and I say, isn't that amazing? My daughter's going to eat cake for the very first time, and my parents looked at each other kind of guilty. Wait a minute, what's going on here? Apparently, my parents were spoiling their grandkids. How many of you want to talk about grandparents? And the best thing that you can spoil your grandkids with, more than money, more than material things, is your time. Time is something that we can never get back. And I am sure that for Timothy's grandmother, that she spent time with Timothy, or else he would have never received the kind of faith that Paul was referring to. The second thing is when we spend time with our grandkids, do you know that they're going to pick up on some things? And the things that they're going to pick up on are our habits. We all have habits, whether good or bad. And I'm sure that when Timothy looked at his grandparents, I'm sure that when he looked at them, at his grandmother Lois, she probably had some really, really good habits. That someone once told me that things are more caught than taught. You can say a lot, but when you spend time with someone, they're going to catch things. They're going to catch the good things. And man, I'm finding out as a parent, they're going to catch some of the bad things too. But fortunately, Timothy, because Timothy's grandma spent time with him, she also had good habits that Timothy picked up on. And it's so much so that it says in the Bible that his faith was enriched because of his grandma. She spent time with him, she had good habits. The last thing that we can do for our grandchildren is that we can share stories. Do you know that stories are really, really powerful? Because stories reveal kind of where our core values come from. Our stories of our life, it reveals why we are the way we are. The things that you talk about the most, the things that you reminisce about the most. That's what impacts us as young people. Is when people tell us the stories that they have gone through. You know, one day one of the pastors told me, he said, you know, Andrew, you have not gone through difficult times. You have not gone through war. You have not gone through a Great Depression. Right? You haven't gone through difficult times. And we don't know, as a younger generation, we don't know what it's like to face difficult times. But I can tell you something. As an older generation, you know how to face difficult times. And you know what? Because you made it, it gives us hope. And that's why grandparents are so important in our lives, because they give us time, they show us the right way to live through good habits, and through their stories, our lives are impacted, and we can see why our grandparents are the way they are. And today, just for a short amount of time, I just want to take time to brag on my grandparents. My grandfather was one of the co-founding pastors of this church. I found out this church was founded in 1947, which is over 67 years ago. This church is 67 years old. And the day that Pastor Vincent got off the boat and stepped onto the shores of Hawaii, he met with my grandfather. And together they planted this church called First Assembly of God. A few years later, in 1952, my grandfather started the very preschool that you saw here on the stage. And this preschool is over 63 years old. And my grandfather was instrumental in shaping and forming what this church is. And because of that, I have such a great admiration for my grandfather. And I look up to him. And more than him just telling me all these great things about what he did, you know, the funny thing is he never told me about all the great things that he did in his life. I found out from other people. And I'm still finding out from so many others that their lives have been impacted by my grandfather. I remember one time I was doing an outreach for a basketball. We did a basketball outreach in Hawaii Kai, and one of the players had gotten injured and had to go to the hospital. So here, you know, me and a pastor, I just dropped everything, took the guys I was with, and we went straight to the hospital. And I remember we're there, we're visiting with him, and we're still in our basketball clothes, like a t-shirt, shorts, basketball shoes. And I told the guy who was driving the car, I said, don't worry, I'm a pastor. We don't have to pay for parking. And they're like, are you sure? Yeah, don't worry. So anyway, we got in the car, we're driving out. And you know, local guys, because they were hot, they just played basketball, took off the shirt, you know, they're driving. And then I took out my car and said, don't worry, we did a hospital visitation. The guy's kind of looking at me like, did you just like steal this car pretending to be a pastor? No, I'm a pastor. Okay, yeah, right, you're a pastor. Like, no, I am. I just came from this. Oh, yeah. And all of a sudden, we were there for like 5 minutes. He actually left his little parking attendant booth, went to talk to his manager. The manager gets out of his office, comes down and talks to me and says, excuse me, sir, it says here that you're Andrew Yasuhara. It says you're a pastor. I said, that's correct. And I was getting kind of scared, so I said, use formal words like, sir. That's correct, sir. And he said, wait a minute, are you related to the Pastor Woodrow Yasuhara? I said, oh yes, that's my grandfather. And then he turned to me and said, oh, you're kind of young. No, we came from this basketball. Okay. And he said to me, I want to tell you thank you. Because it was your grandfather that reached out to my family when they were in the deepest need. It was because of your grandfather. I was like, wow. And the parking attendant's kind of looking at his manager. The manager's looking at him and said, yeah, just let him go. Okay. And you know what? My grandfather made such an impact, but you know the amazing thing is that he never ever told me what he did. He never bragged about what he did. He never bragged about the thousands of lives that he impacted over the 60 some odd years that he was a pastor here at this church. Because when he spent time with me, he wasn't Pastor Yasuhara. When he spent time with me, he was Grandpa. And I can tell you that he spent a lot of time with me. I'm going to share a few things that he did for me that has changed my life. Number one, every Sunday night after service, we have Sunday evening service every night. We still have Sunday evening service. Every Sunday evening, we would go after service to Burger King. It used to be Varsity Theaters, but now there's no more. But in downtown, by the university. And we would eat there all the time. And I remember my grandpa, he would always tell us, okay, whoever gets the longest French fry will get a quarter. Me and my sister were so excited, like, wow, a quarter, so much money. And I remember every Sunday night looking forward to spending time with my grandfather. Some nights, because my grandpa was living in Kamuki, and back then our church was on Little Street, I would sleep over at my grandfather's house, and I remember, him and my grandmother just taking care of us, waking up to scrambled eggs in the morning, smelling the smell of sizzling bacon. And I remember my grandmother making us lunch, and we going to church together. Before we went to school and to church, we would always stop in front of the door, and we would always pray together. Because my grandfather made sure that he spent time with us. It wasn't just about him being the pastor. It wasn't just about him reaching out to all these people. But you know what? Family was important to him. So he made sure that every Sunday night, every Monday morning, that he was spending time with us. Every major holiday, Christmas, Thanksgiving, he was always there. And he would always sit on the same place, the same couch, and always sit back and just make his silly jokes. Always wanted to make jokes. He thought he was pretty funny. I guess I know where I get that from. But he spent time with us. The second thing is that, I saw a lot of habits that made him successful. Because I remember there was a point in my university career, and I was taking a long time to graduate. My grandmother kind of asked me, she said, is it LCC like a 2-year college? How can you there for like 4.5 years? I said, because I tried to make the most of my education. Life-changing college, LCC. And finally I made it to UH, and I'm thinking, oh man, I want to save money because I was living on campus and it was getting kind of expensive. So my grandparents said, you can stay with us for a semester. And let me tell you, that really changed my life. Because I saw some habits in my grandparents that you don't see unless you live with them. We have something called early morning prayer. I remember having a hard time getting up, but I remember my room was right next to the front door. And I remember my grandparents would leave faithfully every morning at 5 in the morning. I would hear the door unlock, I would hear my grandpa and my grandma walk outside, get into the car, and drive off. My grandparents were big on being faithful. They were big on being consistent. If they said they were going to be somewhere, they were going to be there no matter what time of the day it was, no matter what time of the night. I remember my grandpa, he has this thing called an open door policy, which means that no matter how busy he is, he was an associate pastor, he was also district superintendent, that no matter what time of the day, no matter what time of the evening, you could always talk to him. I remember being there in the evenings and just, we would always eat dinner together at 5 o'clock sharp. My grandpa made sure we always ate dinner at 5 o'clock sharp. But there would be calls sometimes, and my grandpa would just get up, and he would just leave. You know why? Because people was important to him. That taught me something. Because my grandpa developed good habits, things that made him successful that I started to catch on to, and things that said, you know what, I want to be like that. Those are things that I want, because I saw it in his life. And the last thing was, because my grandpa would never tell us about what he did, he would never tell us about the lives that my grandfather influenced, the lives that my grandfather impacted. The only way I could hear stories was, he had this thing called the New Believers class. And on this New Believers class, he would teach it faithfully every Sunday. At first service, second service was his Japanese service, but first service was always New Believers class. And I remember going with my sister, we would look forward to going to this New Believer class. You know why? Because he would tell stories. He would tell stories about how God did the miraculous in him. He would tell us the stories about people that would come to him and ask him for help. About this lady who who he was teaching on the power of the name of Jesus, and then he was telling us about how he was able to help this lady and teach her about the authority that she had. And one day this guy came, tried to steal her purse, and she said, "In the name of Jesus, stop!" And she came back to my grandpa and they prayed. And I remember my grandpa saying, a few hours later, that same gentleman who stole the purse came in and he said, "Miss, why are you here?" "I'm here because of the name of Jesus. I'm here to return this purse. Whoever, I'm sorry that I stole it." He felt convicted. And my grandpa led him to the Lord. And I just hear story after story after story from my grandfather. And it's shaping who I am. It's shaping who I desire to be. Because I have a rich, rich, rich heritage. But I don't really know how rich my heritage is unless I hear it. Unless I hear it from my grandfather. And each and every one of you have a rich heritage. You have a rich legacy that you can pass down to your children and to your grandchildren. But they will never know what that legacy is unless you tell them. And it's important for us as a younger generation to hear how you made it through the tough times. How you made it through times where you didn't think you were able to make it, and God somehow miraculously helped you to do what you thought you couldn't do. And yet you are here today because of God's grace. You're here today because of what God has done for you. And let me tell you, grandparents, your lives are going to enrich the lives of your grandchildren. But it's going to take time. It's going to take showing them the habits that you have that made you successful. And the last thing is, you're going to have to take time to tell them the story of your life. And when they hear the story of your life, they're going to be just like Timothy. And then 2 verses later, in 1 Timothy 1:7, it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline." How did Timothy not have a spirit of fear? How was it that Timothy didn't have a spirit of fear? I'll tell you how. It was because he had someone like his grandma that was encouraging him, that was speaking into his life, that was spending time with him, that was showing him how to be successful, because some things are more taught than taught. And today I just want to close by asking, what kind of legacy as a grandparent are you living? Are you leaving for your grandchildren? What kind of legacy are you leaving? You can see how beautiful and how cute they are, but you know what? They're also very, very impressionable. And nowadays, with the busyness of life, with how busy things are getting, I know as a parent that I'm very busy, and I thank God for my parents, because they spend a lot of time with my kids. And my kids are starting to see what makes my parents successful, why they love the Lord so much. And today I want to ask you as grandparents, what kind of legacy are you leaving? Are you leaving a godly legacy like Timothy's grandmother left for Timothy? What kind of impact and significance are you leaving for them? Because this generation is longing and they're looking for you to step in. I'm not saying be the parent, but I'm saying to step in and be the influence that God has desires you to be. So I'm going to ask us to bow our heads and close our eyes, and we're just going to close our time together.